Welcome back, friends. Welcome back to the Corbett Report. You're tuned into Solutions Watch with your host, James Corbett, CorbettReport.com, coming to you in June of 2025 with a conversation with a Solutions Watch all-star repeat guest. Hopefully you know him by now. It's Derrick Broze of the Conscious Resistance Network at theconsciousresistance.com. But if this is your first time checking him out, obviously you can go back to one of our many, many conversations in the past, or you can go directly to his work. But today we're going to be talking specifically about a different piece of work that he's been doing for a long time now, and that is almost complete. It's called The Pyramid of Power. It is a documentary series that is has been provided in digestible half-hour chunks that over a series of episodes. So far, there have been 16 chapters over 4 seasons. There is one gigantic chapter left to go, and I think people who have seen this will know this is a real deal documentary. I shouldn't say Corbett style, but I'm going to say it. A real deal documentary, well edited, and with a hyperlinked transcript, which I think is a mark of quality in and of itself. And it gets into all sorts of subject matter. So let's talk about that. And today we're going to be talking specifically, as the title of today's episode might indicate, on his chapter on the technocratic state, and most importantly, what we can and should be doing about it. So let's bring him on. Derrick Broze, thank you for your time today.
Hey, thanks for having me on, James. And I just want to say you're totally okay to say in Corbett style, because it's absolutely inspired by your work and the quality of your podcast and your documentaries that I was aiming for. So that's totally correct.
Excellent. Well, I'm very gratified to hear that. If nothing else, if I could just help spread that idea of, hey, how about a hyperlink transcript and making all your sources available? If I could just spread that idea alone, I think that my work will have been done. But having said that, let's get into the Pyramid of Power. As I say, it is at thepyramidofpower.net. Obviously, that link will be in the show notes for people who need it. But for people who are just encountering it for the first time, tell us about this documentary series and what you're trying to do here.
Yeah, so, the interesting thing about this, James, it actually started out as a presentation I was giving. I think you probably interviewed me about this back in 2018. We were doing a tour of the U.S., spreading decentralization and individual liberty and all these good things that most of us here care about. And part of that, I decided I wanted to do something different. I wanted to give a presentation about, the so-called New World Order, that I'd never really done something like that, and kind of given my big overview perspective, and of course, brought it to solutions. So this turned into a 2.5-hour presentation that I gave in 50 cities across the U.S., and people were kind enough to sit through it for 2.5 hours. But by the end of the tour, I realized perhaps there's a better format to share this information. And of course, as I said, being inspired by the works that you've done and even my own early documentaries, I could see really quickly how the documentary format would probably be the way to tell this story. And in 2020, I started working on it in that format. It started out as 10 episodes, then 12. And as you said, the idea has grown now to being 16 episodes spread out over 4 seasons, 4 episodes, within a reasonable distance of each other. And then now the final 17th episode. And my goal was to take the works of yourself, other people who've been around before me, who've done amazing documentaries, people who've written really informative and powerful and educational and accurate books, and presenting that information, saying, hey, here's the best resources that I've found, as well as my own original research, trying to keep it under 30 minutes. And of course, ending each episode with, if you want to learn more, watch James Corbett's documentary, read this book, and here's some solutions. Every episode kind of is a little mini solutions watch. I do have like a segment at the end of each one that says, if you're concerned about the education system, look at these things. If you're concerned about big tech, look at this thing. And I think, the whole idea was to really try to make it like bingeable for the Netflix generation. So, 30 minutes or less, suck somebody in with episode 1, and maybe by the end of it, their whole life has been shifted, or at least they're asking questions they weren't before. 75% of them are 30 minutes or less. There's a couple that just, necessitated a little more time. Like I think it's episode 14 about the intelligence networks. I cover the US, British, Chinese, Russian, and Israeli intelligence networks. There's no way to do that in under 30 minutes, but I did it in about 45. So yeah, it's just been this labor of love, really. I also want to make it clear that this entire project has been completely crowdfunded. I've done, I think, 4 different crowdfunding rounds, and we've raised about 45 to 50,000 US. So this is all gone. I haven't got a single penny of this. This has all gone towards my amazing editors. I've worked with 3 different editors over the process of this. So there was one editor for the first couple episodes, another editor for the ones in the middle, and then most recently for the last 4 episodes. And they're just super talented people that I really just want to shout out because they take my words and my research, which I think is great and stands on its own. But as you know, James, people won't necessarily read so much. They will watch things or listen. And so they've made it watchable and listenable and soundtracks and just the whole works. And so I wouldn't be able to do it without them. And so all the money we've raised from more than 500 donors over the last 5 years has gone to paying for the editing process. And so we've been just pumping them out as we can. I've been writing them. And as you said a moment ago, I've recently finished writing the 17th chapter, which is attempting to answer who's at the top of the pyramid. The idea being the first episode's very basic: education system, establishment media. We progressively, as the seasons go on, as the episodes go on, we even kind of symbolize it with the chapters where we start out at the base of the pyramid, and each chapter we kind of highlight another layer of the pyramid, getting deeper and deeper. So chapter 16 was religion and secret societies. We're going to talk about chapter 13, the technocratic state. Chapter 17 is aiming to answer the question, who or what, if anything, is at the top of the pyramid. And then, of course, what do we actually do about it? So it's going to be the big conclusion. It turned out to be a 3-hour episode, so we're going to be releasing it in 2 volumes. The first volume will be out hopefully by the end of this month, June or early July. And then I expect the second volume to be out by late August or September.
Excellent. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to it. This is a real deal, well-edited documentary. So for people who haven't checked it out yet, please do. I think you've done some incredible work, and your editors have obviously done some incredible work too. And as you say, it's structured extremely well, starting at the sort of basic information to draw in everybody and getting progressively more intense. And now, after season 4, talking about the false flag deception and the pedo class and religion and secret societies, definitely getting into some very deep conspiracy reality, shall we say. So, interesting series. I am sure there is something in there for everyone, including people who are just looking for a way to wake people up to some of this information. Having said that, we're going to talk today specifically about Chapter 13 on the technocratic state. And I feel like my regular listeners will probably already have a pretty good background about technocracy and what it is. But having said that, there are always new people who are just tuning in who may not know what technocracy is, let alone why or how we should be resisting it. So why don't you give us just the basic summary of technocracy and the information you present in Chapter 13, and then we'll get into the solutions.
Absolutely, James. I just want to say really briefly that James is featured in the series. So for those who haven't seen it, you can go through and see James is answered sprinkled throughout there, as well as G. Edward Griffin. Patrick Wood, of course, is in the technocratic state, and many other folks that you may know out there and others you may not know, but who I think are doing great work. So I just wanted to add that. As far as technocracy goes, I do think most of your audience is probably familiar, James, but for those who are new, look around. Look around and see what technocracy is at the very world we're living in right now. Historical technocracy is, of course, the 1930s, 1940s movement, which was popular in Canada and in the United States, a few other places, but mainly in North America. And it was this movement of individuals who were kind of responding to Great Depression, to just different economic failures going on, and saying the capitalist class don't know what they're doing. The voters are too dumb to know what's going on. We need the engineers, the scientists, the experts to manage society. And at that time, the people who were writing about this, including a man named Howard Scott, they were talking about using the machines. They didn't have the same terminology we do now. I think you probably would say using AI if you were talking in 2025 terms. But they said that the technocrats, the engineers, and the scientific and technological elite should use the machines to micromanage all of society, to allocate resources. Of course, they promised this would be a utopia and benefit everybody. They had ideas about energy credits, which sound a lot like carbon credits. They also acknowledged that creating such a world would involve certain curtailing of individual liberties and privacies in order to maintain this type of world. And their sort of governing body they call the technate, and at the top of the technate would be the technocratic king, or the corporate CEO, if you will, the person who would be actually running things in this so-called utopia. And so the movement did have quite a bit of popularity for some years, and had followers all over the country, and they had conferences and books and all this sort of stuff. But we're basically told that it sort of faded away to the dustbin of history as just another failed outburst of the progressive movement, but it actually had a little bit of a revival in the 70s with Zbigniew Brzezinski, who again is hopefully familiar to all of James's audience here, that he's a long-term deep state agent. He wrote the book, The Technotronic Era, America Between Two Ages, that kind of pulled up the Howard Scott and the original technocratic idea, rebranded it Technotronic, but again, described very much the same thing, something promised as a utopia, but using technology and propaganda and different things to manage the population, promising that it would be a utopia and that, the technology would be a part of that. Now in 2025, we've got Elon Musk, of course, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, all these billionaires coming from the big tech industry with ties to the intelligence networks, with ties to the military industrial complex. As far as I'm concerned, they are the technocratic class of the current era, and they have the power, despite not being elected, to geoengineer the weather, to mess with the stock market, to do all kinds of things, even though they're not even officially quote unquote in power. So that's a little bit about what the movement is. And of course, I think more and more people are becoming familiar with it because, again, the role of Elon Musk, more people, especially as we're speaking now, more people are talking about Peter Thiel than I think ever, Palantir and these sort of things. And so if you're thinking of those ideas or you're learning more about that, then you're becoming more familiar with technocracy.
This is it, and you have a great summary there, and an even better summary in Chapter 13 itself, and supported by, of course, Patrick Wood, who will be familiar to my audience at technocracy.news, who's been ringing the alarm bell about technocracy for over a decade at this point, and writing books about it and going into it. So for people who need that sort of deeper dive, all of that information is out there, and I would suggest you start exploring my archives, Derrick's archives, Patrick Wood's archives, etc., to find out more information about that. But I think you put it very well. If you want to know what technocracy is, take a look around at what's happening. And one example of that may seem like it's out of left field or not related to this, because when people hear technocracy, they probably specifically think technology. But actually, as you say, it's really about rule by experts of various kinds. So the word technocrat was first popularized in the mainstream press a decade or so ago, a couple of decades ago even, talking about economists and how economists, technocrats, are going to steward over the economy. There's that aspect to it. How about health technocrats, the experts who are going to tell you when and how and under what conditions you can leave your house, or what things you must or must not put in your body, etc., etc. The whole COVID scamdemic was a brilliant example of technocracy and the technocratic management of day-to-day life. So yes, there is the technological aspect to this, but it goes deeper and higher in every possible way. And yes, if you want to know what that looks like, take a look around at the encroaching regulations, restrictions, and micromanagement of our lives that is increasingly being regulated by various technologies, and of course, pimped by the big tech bros, who are all lined up at Trump's inauguration. So what does that say about the world in which we are situated? It is not a political left-right thing. This is something that transcends the politics that is dangled out in front of us. So, having said
James,
that,
what you just said
we are
there,
facing is...
I think it... Sorry, just to say that, James, I think that's so important what you just said, because I run into that a lot, that people, I guess, who aren't properly informed about technocracy, they think that just means technology. And I know the words look a lot alike, but people will just assume. So when you say you're speaking against technocracy, because I'll see things like, yeah, well, you're using a computer. And it's like, well, I'm not anti-technology. I'm anti-technocracy. And it's a subtle and maybe even silly point, but I do think it is one that is more common than people might realize, that people just simply don't even understand what we're talking about.
It is true, and so we shouldn't make assumptions about what people do or do not understand about the subject. But once they start looking into it in its complexity and its depth, I think we will all agree it's a gigantic, monumental problem, which is a great opportunity for some solutions, which is why we are here at Solutions Watch. We are not concentrating on and dwelling on problems and woe is us. Solutions Watch and the remit of this regular series is, what can we do about it? So on that note, as you say, most of your episodes in Pyramid of Power end with some sort of section about what people can do about what is happening related to these various issues. Let's start talking about what can be done about this technocratic encroachment on our lives.
That's probably the only question that really matters at this point, I think. Yes, getting caught up is important, but solutions is really just so vital right now, especially because the technocracy is becoming more important every day. I mean, James, you interviewed me, I think, a couple times about my book, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State, which was written way, way, way back in 2020, warning about the coming technocracy. And 5 years later, it wasn't predicting anything. It was just reading the obvious tea leaves and saying, this is what's on the horizon, facial recognition, AI, et cetera. So what do we do about it? To me, I'm still in the camp that we need to resist as much as possible. So what does that look like? That could look like, if you're so inclined, writing letters to senators in hopes that they do something. I wouldn't put much weight or stock or time, energy into that. Signing online petitions, I basically feel the same about those. That's not to say if you are having some success on a county level, local level, do what you feel inclined if it's working. I think we do need to try maybe an anything, all hands on deck kind of strategy. But again, I'm still more inclined to think resistance in my book means getting out of their systems where and when possible, which is not easy. I definitely think we're both and probably everybody in the audience is already on the page, that waiting around for whoever the next populist hero is to save the day from the technocracy is also a failed solution. Trusting the plan, none of those things are real. So to me, resistance can be in the form of opting out of the facial recognition in the airports as it's rolling out. That's one form of, right? Like, it's a subtle form, but it's also standing up and saying no. And it's also probably more strong than people realize. When I opt out, because I still do fly right now, that might change pretty soon here. If it becomes mandatory, I might make that decision. But right now, if I'm flying internationally from the US or into the US and other countries, when they're testing it out, they'll try to get you to stand in front of the tablet, just like COVID. You can just stand to the side before they even get a chance to take your picture and say, no, thanks, give them your passport. You have that option. And when I do it, I'm usually the only person doing it out of, however many ever hundreds of people are in the airport. And that's unfortunate. But if more of us started to do that, and then I think there might be more of a movement towards that. Because of course the governments aren't going to do a big job of putting it plastered everywhere. By the way, you have the right to opt out of this. It's usually a small sign. And I've noticed it's often right at the end, right when you're about to get your face scanned, if it's even visible. So if other people realize that that's an option, then perhaps that creates a ripple, and that's always the hope, of course. And through that, airlines, governments, et cetera, might realize this is going to be more difficult. Perhaps it gets delayed a little bit further. I'm a bit, not black-pilled, but I am a bit, not so optimistic about the idea that we can completely stop what it seems to be steamrolling forward. That is why I put a lot of energy into trying to opt out and, of course, building parallel systems, which is something we've been talking about now for over a decade, James, in terms of agorism and counter economics. I still think that is the way. I think it's becoming even more clear the way that we need to not be dependent on their banks if we're going to not get shifted into CBDCs or stable coins or any other kind of thing they come up with. We need to not be dependent on big tech. And that is, I'm saying these things with the caveat that these all take time and energy. And, I've put some work into trying to explore each of these, but I do think these are the main areas that I tend to focus on. The financial aspect, so the banks and things of that sort, big tech, so the platforms you use, the operating systems you use, the messaging services, et cetera. Again, none of this is easy. Food is the other big one, not becoming dependent and remaining dependent on the big box stores and their, easily disrupted supply chains, et cetera. And then I would also say education, whether that's education for your kids or educating your own adult mind, the ways we do that, the sources we do that. And then probably a fifth one, which I would say is probably the most important, is more on the personal development, psychological, spiritual, if you will, side of things, exiting from unhealthy and limiting mindsets and limiting beliefs, which actually tell people like, oh, no, there's no reason to even try. They're just going to come kill us. They're going to come drone bomb us. You ever heard of Waco? I hear these things all the time. Like anytime I try to propose a parallel system, people say there's no way they're going to let that. So we need to try the politics, or we need to be violent, or we should just give up. And, I'm not going to live my life in fear that opting out and trying to build parallel systems will inevitably lead to a bloody death. But at the same time, that I acknowledge that is a potential in all the realm of potential, infinite possibilities. That doesn't mean I'm going to allow that fear to prevent me from trying, because I do think we have a better chance of success of shifting our energy out of their system, stop playing the game, and trying to put energy into this, what I call exit and build strategy, which I've been just working on and living and developing more and more the last couple of years. And specifically, as you said, James, COVID was a complete technocratic operation. So COVID was like the perfect example of watching people try to start pulling away. And I think when things settled down, some people kind of they just moved on. They thought, well, Trump is here now, so we don't have to worry about building those parallel systems anymore. But I think that's still the
Trump,
answer.
who started the warp speed vaccine campaign, is going to save us from the vaccines, etc. Right? Okay, you raised such good points there. And I want to talk about exit and build as a strategy in more depth. But before I do, let me highlight what you were saying there about opting out. It's such a simple, but such a important and powerful tool that we have at our disposal right now. Nothing needed. You don't need to, lobby your politicians, etc. The opting out already exists. And I think one of the most insidious tactics that is used against us by the technocrats and other would-be rulers of society is to simply create the norm, the expectation. This is how it'll work. Oh, yeah, you can do this if you want to. But whatever, don't look at that. Look at this. This is the new norm. And now you have to do it this way. And opting out is such a simple but effective way of putting a wrench in the system. And that takes place in many different forms. As you say, for example, opting out of the scanners at the airport or what have you. And I go back to this example because, again, it was just a small thing that happened in my life. But I realized, this is kind of important. I was at the bank. Here in Japan, you get a little bank book with, your balance summary or whatever. And when it fills up, you go and get a new one. And I've been doing this since I've lived in Japan, right? But this time when I go to get a new one, they say, you just order it on your app. Like, you don't come to us. What are you doing? Just put it on I'm like, I don't have the app. I'm not getting the app. So how are we going to do this? And then it became this big rigmarole in which they eventually, if we sign this form and make this paperwork, I guess we can do this. And it took, 20 minutes or whatever it took, of extra nonsense. But hey, I opted out and they, okay, I guess the opting out exists. And I think more people need to be a butthead about these things and be like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not getting the app. I'm not doing this thing in order to access this service that I used to get all the time without an app. Why do we need an app for it? And the more people who do that, not only are you preserving the space for opting out for other people, you're also being that signal to other people who will see you and see, you can opt out of that? Oh, I didn't know. Oh, wow. Maybe I should do that. And you can be part of that ripple effect that I think will actually help change things on a broader level. It's going to come from us at the very, very least, not just going along to get along. Having said that, the other
being a
part
butthead,
of this,
that's
of course, opt out where you
solutions
can.
I've heard so far, James. I was saying
Exactly.
being a butthead is probably the best solutions you've mentioned.
Be a butthead. Exactly. Right. Just don't go along just because they say it. Don't be nice and polite. Be a butthead when you need to be a butthead.
Could I add just two more quick examples to that, James?
Sure. Yeah.
Sorry. Just in terms, I want to just make it a little more palatable. I mean, you mentioned like the example you gave, I mentioned opting out of facial recognition, but even more to just make it mundane for people, I opt out of the app at the gym. Miriam and I go to a gym. They try to say, no, you got to have the app if you want to sign in. You got to, or even some of them like scan your thumbprint or just crazy stuff like that. And we say, we're not going to do that. Can I still pay you money to enter your facility? And eventually they're like, yeah, I guess you could just tell us your phone number when you show up. And like, oh, okay. Well, can I just, do that? And things like that. Or even the COVID one, right? All the menus started to disappear everywhere. Most the places, that's still the thing in a lot of places. Then, the menus haven't come back. But often if you just say, hey, can I get a physical menu? To me, those are even subtle, simple ways that you are opting out and you're not choosing to participate and just go along like you were saying, James. And so even little things like that are signs of resistance and pushing back against this technocracy.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree. I think that's the simple thing that we can start doing right now. No preparation, nothing special, just assert yourself when needed. You don't have to be rude about it, but maybe you should be at times. Anyway, I'm not telling people how to act. At any rate, the other side of this, as you say, is, okay, great, so we're opting out of that, but what are we creating in its place is the other incredibly important part of this. And that is, I think, the exit and build strategy that you're talking about. For people who haven't heard about exit and build and what that strategy/philosophy means, tell us about that.
Yeah, so as I mentioned agorism or agorism earlier, I encourage people who are not familiar, go back and watch James's reports over the years. He's got some great ones. I've got some on my website, but I was inspired by that philosophy, which, we're not going to go into the whole history, but it's largely what I'm talking about. I've just sort of updated it for the digital age, and I call it exit and build. And I think I did make it a bit more holistic, where agorism is mainly focused on counter economies and parallel economies, which is obviously a big part of the equation. I sort of took that idea and said, well, what if we not just vote with our dollar and, don't support Walmart or whatever corporations or people you don't like, and try to avoid taxes if you feel so inclined, but also to try to opt out and avoid different systems. So that's what I was saying, like education system, food system, big tech. These are all different areas. I actually call them slavery systems, because in the long term, that's what they're going to lead to. If we just stay stuck on, well, I can just keep using JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America forever. I can just trust that my big box local store is always going to have all the food I want. These things are sort of setting us up, I think, for failure potentially, but at the very least, sort of weaknesses that we have. And in my view, COVID, we saw how the technocrats and the tyrants, they will squeeze those weaknesses and they will use those as pressure points to socially engineer people into compliance. So then in my view, what we should do is try to strengthen those areas, right? To become less dependent on those systems. So when they do try to squeeze, you're like, oh, okay, good. Squeeze all you want. I don't need that. I've got this, I'm kind of exiting already, right? So exit and build, it kind of has two parts. One simple way to understand it is what I was describing earlier. I'll talk more about that in a second. But the other one is location-wise. So for a lot of people during COVID, you might have been in a city that was extremely crazy with all kinds of mandates, mask mandates, PCR tests, shot injections, all that fun stuff. And you decided that 2 towns over, or the state over, or maybe even the country over, people seem to be living a lot more freely. And you thought, that seems better for my family and my future. Maybe it's a temporary solution, but a lot of people did those sort of things. And in the US, people moved from California and New York to Texas or Florida or Idaho and some of these states that seem to fare better. That's exit and build on one hand, right? Is just simply recognizing that the location you are in is not conducive to long-term liberty, privacy, et cetera. And so you want to exit from that place and go build in greener pastures, that sort of thing. Then the other aspect is more about personal habits and the philosophy side of things. And that's what I started to share earlier, where you start to look at your life, or take what I call a holistic self-assessment of your life, and look at these different areas and see where you have the most weaknesses. Maybe you've got $50,000 in student loan debt or credit card debt or whatever. It is my belief that these things can and will be used against us as the technocracy increases. These are things that could penalize you or harm you once we go into a full-on social credit score system where all these systems are interconnected, and they can say, well, you have lost the privilege now to travel. And we can, how do they do that? Well, they can turn off your digital ID, right? And prevent you from going out of state if they want, or they could penalize you in all sorts of untold forms that we can't even imagine yet. So I think what we should do is look at those areas. Another one would say, yeah, I'm generally 100% dependent on the big box grocery store. I couldn't, plant a seed to save my life. I've never been to a farmer's market, these kind of things. So then you start to realize that's a weakness that could be used against me. I'm not saying everybody needs to be a farmer or needs to turn into a permaculturist overnight. I think these are valuable knowledge sets to learn more about. But at the very least, maybe you do meet the people who are growing food near you. Maybe you do go to the farmer's market on the weekend and you see the people who are growing the produce you like, or selling the goods you like, or the eggs that you eat, or whatever it is that your diet contains, and get to know those people. Maybe you exchange direct information with them so you don't have to be dependent on the market. Maybe you go visit where they're growing their food or hosting their chickens or animals or whatever, and start to develop those relationships. I know in my life, those relationships became extremely important during COVID, because we were able to tell these farmers, if they lock down, if things shut down, we will meet you directly and buy your black market eggs or whatever, your lettuce or whatever it was that week. And maintaining those relationships. And if you want to go even further, maybe you put in an hour at a community garden or a local farm just to see what it's like to get your hands in the dirt, right? This is going to be different for each person. I do try to provide a bunch of these ideas in my book, which we've talked about before, but I'll remind everybody, you can download it for free, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State, at theconsciousresistance.com/how-to. And I also did want to mention, James, since I started originally, when I put the book out in 2020, then I updated in 2022 based on what we learned during COVID. But since then, it just continues to develop, because everything I'm sharing is not anything I'm not attempting to do in my own life. I'm speaking from experience. Samuel Konkin, the founder of Agorism, said, we won't be very convincing as agorists if we're not leading by action and, leading by example. So that's what I attempt to do. And so everything I'm sharing here are things that I'm in the process of my own life doing. And what I did is I created a 45-day exit and build challenge, which people can find for free at theconsciousresistance.com/EXB, exit and build, EXB. And it's just a 7-week program that goes through each of these areas: food, technology, land, money, et cetera. And I go through different systems. We talk about each one. What are the problems in these systems? What are the potential solutions? And then I give a little bit of homework each week. And the idea, I did it leading up to the 2024 election in the hopes that maybe convincing a few people there was better use of their time than participating in the selection. So that's another thing. If this is new to you and you actually want to try to, put your life into this and give it a shot for just 7 weeks, I believe if you actually take it seriously and you just take even a few of these ideas and apply them to your life and you start practicing that over this 7-week period or even longer, then you will find that there's some value in this, and probably, I would argue, way more value than supporting politicians and trusting the plan and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, I try to apply the idea holistically, but ultimately it's going to be up to each individual. I mean, again, my message is not anti-technology. It's about how do we relate to technology. We talked about this recently on the Artificial Intelligence Independent Media Alliance panel. Everybody's going to have a different sort of line in the sand. I mentioned earlier, like about the facial recognition. I do plan to stop flying once my passport expires or facial recognition becomes mandatory, whichever the two. If we can't prevent it, that's a line for me that I'm not just going to say, oh, well, I've been fighting this for years, but I guess I'll just give in because I still got to fly. That's a line in the sand for me. Everybody needs to understand what their lines are. They need to understand what your goals are and what does your 2030 and beyond look like. Because if it doesn't look like technocracy, then I think we need to start putting as much energy into these ideas. Not to say it's the only solution, but again, I see no hope in politics. I see no hope in apathy or violence. So instead, I'm trying to put as much energy and push as much of our so-called freedom, truth, conspiracy realist movement towards practical solutions. And I think Exit and Build is at least part of that.
I absolutely concur. I think we are touching on a number of bread and butter issues that Solutions Watch keeps revolving around. One is opting out. The other is exiting and building the world you want to create. And of course, that brings with it the question of community, because you can't do it by yourself. You do have to form those relationships with the people in the agoristic community that you're creating around you. And on that very note, of course, I've talked to your partner, Miriam Gomez, about building community. And that's a previous edition of Solutions Watch that people can hearken back to if they want more discussion on that. So lots of important things on the table today. But I want to finish with something that you raised earlier, the specter, the dark specter. I've called it the dark version of Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. As in, oh yeah, you can go and try to make your little community of people, interacting with each other, but then them, those are going to come down and it's going to be war, it's going to be Waco, whatever. Therefore, and the point is actually, there's never actually a therefore you should. No one ever says that. They always just say, oh yeah, but if you build something, they're going to try to destroy it. Okay, so what is the implication? Oh, I guess I should just not try. I shouldn't do anything then, because they will just come along and destroy it or something like that. Can you speak to that mindset of the naysayers who will just say, well, you can't do anything because they're going to try to destroy it?
They're already typing in the comments, James, right now. I can feel it. And they're always there. This is my usual typical response. And sometimes maybe I can be a little crass with it, but I truly believe this. Like you said, so what? Okay. Like I said, in the infinite realm of possibilities, yes, it's a possibility that one day bad men from the government or anybody could come and try to say, hey, we're going to disrupt your community you're building and cause you harm or whatever. That's a fact of life. And I don't think that is enough of a argument or an excuse to say, okay, well, then I guess I won't even try. Because what I'm telling people is, like, people have been telling me that for 5 years now. We started on our own venture, getting land in Mexico. We're 5 years into it. We actually, a little update, James, to your audience. I know you talked to Miriam, as you said. We just paid off the land in January. So we now own this property. We're starting to build homes later this year. So 5 years in, nobody's come to kill me and stop me yet. And I can probably get to 10 years safely, and maybe 15 years, and maybe even 20 years. And in that time, if I'd listened to these naysayers, I would have done nothing, because, one day some bad person might come and stop me from doing what I want to do. Again, I don't deny that that's a possibility. We believe in self-defense for all that's worth. I'm not trying to go out like Rambo, but at the same time, I'd rather, in the realm of possibilities, I'd rather die, defending a piece of land that I've built a home on with people I care about who are like-minded, who are growing food and living a life of my principles in line with my values and my creator, as opposed to saying, well, because of this fear, I'm just going to keep standing still. I'm going to keep voting for people. I'm going to keep, just being apathetic, or I'm just going to give up and be blackpilled and just, talk crap on the internet. none of those ideas are solutions, and none of them are sufficient for me. So I'm going to continue on the exit and build path. And I encourage people, if they've got better ideas, to do that. But I bet in about 5 to 10 years time, I will have a lot to show for being on this path. And like I said, if somebody comes one day to take it away, we'll deal with that. But until then, I'm going to do what I can to kind of blaze that trail and inspire anybody else who wants to go down it with me.
This is the way forward, and I'm glad there are people like you out there that are not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. So I will definitely be along to see how this develops, and I'm sure we will have further conversations along these lines in the future. But let's leave it there for today. Derrick Broze, theconsciousresistance.com, but more importantly, for the purposes of today's conversation, the pyramidofpower.net. Again, those links will be in the show notes for people who want to check it out and check out specifically the chapter 13 on the technocratic state that we are talking about. But Derrick, I think we'll leave it there for today. Thank you, as always, for doing what you do.
Thank you, James.
The deep state. False flags. 9/11 truth. The Federal Reserve. Secret wars and hidden histories. Fake news. Medical martial law. Ceaseless propaganda. James Corbett. Reportage. Essays on the New World Order. Available where books are sold. Until they're not.
Reportagebook.com